everybody. Today, as you can see, I'm not going to play a game, but I'm going to talk about a type of game. And the type of game is pretty much, in its broadest sense, the choose your own adventure. I've been playing Grimrock Isle, as you see if you look at my channel. Today I've got 4 videos up for this one, 4 playthroughs. I died. I will probably make another character, and then, you know, I'll also talk about the shortcomings, because now I know what to look for. I need a character that has fast talk, a lot of mechanical repair, spot hidden, and listen, and, you know, that's what I will have to do, which is also one of the shortcomings of this type of game. But of course, it all started probably, as you all know, with the fighting fantasy books by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, and this is probably the one that most people have at least heard of. It's called The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. They have seen a resurgence, and these are now readily available. I have several of these, and I remember playing them a long, long time ago, and I remember enjoying them. Now, a friend of mine actually is totally in love with these books, and he also has the fighting fantasy RPG, and so we played the RPG, and some of the RPG stuff actually then is also in these books, so some of the settings are there. And yeah, I remember playing them. The way they work is you have a little character sheet. You're not really that much of a, I don't know, Citadel of Chaos, I think I played that one as well. You have a character that has like 3 skills, skill, stamina and luck. You can get gold, jewels, potions, provisions, remaining items and equipment carried. So it's the it's a very, very basic role-playing character. You didn't even have a space for your name, I think. Did you? Did they provide that? Probably not, but it was kind of like really fighting fantasy, and that's what it's called. 2d6, you roll, you see what happens. And I remember playing this, and I don't know if I had any issues mapping this one. And I came to the very end. When I revisited them at the age of 43, I have to say they hadn't aged well. They are very simplistic. They're not very evocative, but then again, they're written for 8-year-olds who will not be able to immerse themselves as much because their attention spans are a lot less. But, you know, they are what they are, and for their time and also for the audience, they were brilliant. I remember loving them as a child. Then, of course, we have a series, I should say, of solo adventures, choose your own adventures by Chaosium, based on their Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. This is Alone Against the Wendigo, which I played and then abandoned because it was just very, very boring. Then I think this is probably Alone on Halloween, which I played to the very end. And it was quite promising. I really enjoyed it. It was, I mean, it had such a good start. I remember when we suddenly ended up in where did we end up? In Carcosa. I was like, okay, this is going to be super. This is so atmospheric. And then, well, it was, you know, like lots of cultists. Let's just throw in like 5 gazillion monsters, as Chaosium is wont to do. And they kind of really overdo it with the mythos and really overstretch it to the point where it is kind of totally grotesque. And I've said this in another video that there is a lot of grotesqueness in Lovecraft, but his most terrifying stories usually don't have any Cthulhu mythos creature in them, and they're really atmospheric. And I think why I'm always so disappointed in the Chaosium stuff is, it's supposed to be a horror adventure, but it's hardly ever horrific. Grimrock Isle was made in the 90s, 1992, I believe. And somebody who was watching my video said that they found it a bit difficult to get into these games, but that this seemed to be a lot different, or maybe a lot better than other choose your own adventure stories. Well, I would say it's different in terms of it has way more things you could essentially look at. I think it says somewhere that it's got 1,000 entries, which is true. And we've seen a lot, and it has become really tedious. And as somebody pointed out, that I was not patient enough and didn't spend enough time in places, and I have to actually say this is not true. Because, for example, the cemetery, I came there at night, so I did see stuff. Probably more so than I would have if I had been there during the day. But then I come to the tomb where I have to make a luck roll, and I fail this. Of course, if I'd made the luck roll, I would probably have gone to other places. I would have found things that might have advanced the story. But this is a shortcoming of the game. You can't just keep doing and redoing your rolls simply because you failed them and you want to go on. That's not how storytelling works. If you do it this way, and I guess you can, because mechanically speaking, there is nothing to be said against this, it'll actually defy the idea of having a story where luck is an element. Because then you could just say, let's not do the luck roll at all. You know, let's just give you the information, whatever is in there. I mean, the one thing where I didn't fail my luck roll was actually when I found all the money. The money doesn't really help me because I'm rich anyway, but now I've got 10,000 in gold, which is never bad. But of course, then I died. Thompson's Bridge was also such a point where it basically starts off, if you've come to meet somebody, go to blah. If you've come here during the day, you will find 56, while your arrival after sunset will see you at 45. So depending on where you arrive, different things happen. And I remember that there was something where they said, if you have come to meet someone, you go there, and if you don't, then that's it, you go someplace else. I mean, what we did do was we found the way to the swamp, and we did go to the swamp, we didn't really get anywhere after that either, because then it was just like, okay, now you spend time there and now you just go back. So I can see that there is plenty of stuff in here. And I don't know if I arrived during the day. I think I arrived after sunset, didn't I? 45, let's see. If you came here on a whim, exactly, you will find 67. If you came here to meet someone, you may wait at 11. We didn't, so we couldn't do this. And I still don't know who I should who I should meet here, because the people that I was trying to talk to always required a fast talk roll, which I failed. Hutchins Cave was quite interesting, and we actually found interesting stuff, but we also encountered this guy and died. And of course I could now go back with a new character and try again. But, you know, it's kind of like, this is like a total party wipe. You're dead. You can either roll up a new character and then go through all of this again to get to where you were. You can take a shortcut and say, yeah, I'm going to roll up a new character, then I'm going to go straight to Grimrock Isle, deduct half an hour for the travel, then go to 229, which is on the second floor, or whatever floor it is, skip the whole episode in the wardrobe where we nearly got killed, and just keep going. But unfortunately, that's not a game. And I think this is where this type of game falls short quite easily, because they are trying to be role-playing games, and role-playing games either usually have more than one character playing. And in a good party, you have characters that complement each other. So you don't just have all clerics or all wizards. Wizards usually in D&D, for example, have very limited hit points. So although they might be quite good at dealing damage, you know, once they run out of spells, they're pretty much toast. Because they have no weapons, they have no armor, and they have very, very few hit points. So, you know, that's it. So you would have a party that can do different things, and best case scenario, you have different skill sets as well, and as a result, people will be able to complement each other's skills and will get through the different challenges that present themselves or are presented to the characters. Here, as you saw, I failed all of my mechanical skill checks, so I couldn't get into the lighthouse. That's it. Can't get in. So I could, of course, say, yeah, I can keep making those checks. But how realistic is this? Somebody has a lighthouse which they have locked, and then there is this stranger from out of town, and she just keeps trying to unlock this door. Sooner or later, somebody would come out and say, what are you doing here, lady? And what are you trying to do? Are you trying to break in? You know, so just to keep making those rolls would, of course, at some point, probably, the probability is that I would succeed and I would be able to get in there. But then I might just as well skip ahead and just pretend that I did, because there is no danger here. And running out of time, I mean, it says before the deadline, after the deadline. Unless I have really not found this piece and it's missing, I have no idea what my deadline is. But I take it to be 14. Because it says I need 14 copies of this Grimrock Island timetable, and that would be 14 days. But I could endlessly make those checks, because each check is like, what, 15 minutes or something? So I keep making those checks. At some point I will pass, I go in there, and then I do the exploring part. Yeah. Or I could just pretend that I made it, give myself 2 hours of time on the track, and then just go in. So there is no inherent tension. It's very different if you play with a GM, and of course it can't reproduce a GM. It's a choose your own adventure, and so that's the downside of it, and it's something that we have to accept. It is different, even given this downside, if the story is immersive, and it's just big. It's got very many entries, and those of you who saw me trying to map out Grimrock House, or Grim House, it's not based on a map that exists. That's terribly badly designed. If you are sending someone into a house which is essentially, and you saw, I explored every single room in the basement, everywhere. There was nothing there. Nothing. We didn't find a single thing. And not only did we not find anything, there wasn't anything to find, because they have to, since this is not something where you can just say, okay, well, there's a room, let's just search it. They have to tell you if you can search, otherwise it doesn't work. And the 1 or 2 rolls that I did have to make, I all passed. It got really difficult when we were upstairs because my power was so low that I couldn't escape from the cupboard, but that was it, you know. Other than that, we found everything that was there, and there was very little to find. So again, you know, it's like, go here, go there, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, do I want to spend this much time on this? I've already just spent 4 hours just playing the game. That doesn't take into account the prep work, making the copies, designing the character. You know, do I really want to go back? Well, maybe I do. I don't know. But, you know, it's what it is. But it has its shortcomings, and I don't think it's actually that well made. So the question that was raised with me is, what other games are there, and maybe are they better? Well, I will show you 2 that are, in a way, I will show you one that is definitely a choose your own adventure. It's Time Stories. I've played 2 of these adventures. I've seen all of the others played except for Estrella Drive, which I have here, and it's not even been unpacked, so I will unpack this at some point and I will play it. And it is choose your own adventure, but it's also a mixture where you have a group adventure. Usually people say you can't play it solo, but you can. It's not a problem. I play it solo. Solar McLaughlin has done it solo. It does work solo. Only this whole idea of you know something and other people don't because you're not allowed to share the knowledge with them. You're not allowed to show them the cards. Yeah, that kind of falls flat, because if I see the card, then I can't pretend not to have seen the card. It's a mixture of choose your own adventure with text and images. You have characters which have certain traits, so there is also some amount of die rolling, so there's some amount of chance, and you have a timer where you roll the time die and then it counts backwards. But even there, after you've reached a certain number of repetitions, it'll just let you go. You can just keep doing it. Which of course kind of defies the purpose, but at the end of the day you get fewer rewards. But of course you can cheat the game by just giving yourself more rewards. Who can tell, you know? But it's like, you know, why would you cheat? But at the end of the day, you do want to get through it. The difference between this one and Grimrock Isle and all of the ones that I've seen that are Call of Cthulhu is it contains puzzles. Now puzzles I would call mental challenges, where you have to use your mind, and this is very important. You, the player, have to use your own mind, your own wits, your own intelligence to solve them. It's very different from, for example, Mansions of Madness, where they had those puzzles which you had to solve, but you were using your avatars, your characters' abilities. And if your character wasn't very smart, you might only get 2 tries. Although you knew exactly how to solve it, and they were quite often, you know, like moving bits around and, you know, like, you know, they were more things to do with, you know, trying to get something in a certain order. And you know from looking at it, it's going to take me 4 movements to get this in order, but I only have 2 tries. I know exactly what I have to do. My mental challenge, or my mind has mastered this mental challenge, but my character is so weak of mind that he can't do it. That was terribly frustrating, and that's what a lot of people criticize the game for. You know, if you're going to introduce puzzles that are not based on roles, like in an RPG, oh, I have to make a, you know, like give me a spot hidden, give me an intelligence roll, blah, blah, blah. You have to ensure that you don't frustrate the audience by saying, yes, we know that this is something that you have to do in your own mind because it requires a certain level of thinking, but we're just going to pretend that you have the mind of your character, which may be really weak-minded, and then you don't manage to do it and you have to spend time, which is kind of annoying. But again, it's trying to mitigate the fact that you do not have this outside influence who is the judge, who drives the who keeps the story together, not who drives it, because that should be the players, but we're talking about the dungeon master, and that's not there. So they're trying to find ways of challenging you. At least they tried in Mansions of Madness, and they definitely try in Time Stories, and sometimes it works really well, especially if the games are if the challenges are pictorial, because the pictures are always the same. It becomes very difficult when the stories are when the challenges are based on language. Time Stories is written in French. This is Estrella Drive, and this seems to be one of the worst translations out there. I've seen this time, unlike with the last one that I played, Lumen Fidei, where we basically ended up with a lot of errata, and in the end I just couldn't stand the game because they had changed the rules that had been adhered to through all of the other games just to basically get one over on the players, because unfortunately there was very little plot and the story was very thin. So they were like, okay, to make it somehow interesting, we're just going to take away one of the key elements of the game without telling them up front, and then we're just going to confront them with it and say, ah, there you are, la 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 la, which is something that I really, really hate when that happens. With Estrella Drive, we have a translation problem, and apparently the translation is really, really bad, and in some cases completely ludicrous and ridiculous. I just hope it doesn't impact the puzzles, because if you have a linguistic puzzle which is translated wrongly, you end up with big issues. But all in all, Time Stories is a big step up from all of this, because it creates the atmosphere using different things. It uses storytelling, it uses imagery. Pictures are very important. You have to really look at them, and anyone who's played Marcy Drive, not Marcy Drive, the Marcy Case will remember this, because look at every single avatar card, even if you're not going to play that character, and read their backstory carefully. You have to retain information. Some debate exists whether you're allowed to take notes from run to run. Some people say you're not allowed to take notes. Others say you are allowed to take notes. But it's, you know, it's neither here nor there. If you take notes, I would always take notes because, you know, these games can take a very long time, several hours. And, you know, you do want to get something out of this and not, you know, like, oh, yeah, we forgot about this. So, yeah. They are a lot better thought out, but they also have their shortcomings. I will not hide this. Replayability is 0 in most cases, I would say, although I would disagree. I mean, I think you can replay them, but a lot of people will argue replayability is 0, but then again, replayability is 0. Once you've seen it all, you've seen it all. But here, of course, there's a bigger luck factor, so you might just die before it. So, you know, that's how this works. And then we have something called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which is not quite a choose-your-own-adventure, but which does something similar. It puts you, and in this case, this is a complete change in terms of you don't have an avatar, you're not pretending to be someone, you're not the fighting fantasy person with a sword, you're not an investigator in Call of Cthulhu, you're not whatever Estrella Drive gives you in the form of avatars. You are yourself, and you're putting your intelligence against a case. And in a way, it's choose your own adventure, because how you solve the case, how you go about solving the case, which areas you go to, which clues you decide to follow is pretty much your own choice. You can also decide not to go somewhere. You can also not realize that you should be going somewhere. So it is, in a way, choosing your own path. The difference here is that it's really you against the game. There is no mitigation, there is no luck rolls, there is no luck involved. Like Estrella Drive does have a luck component. You do, or Time Stories I should say, you do roll dice. None of this. It's you and hopefully a well thought out case that can be solved logically. Which brings us to the heart of what I'm missing about these games. It's too thin a story to just base it on luck and just sending you from one entry to the next. It's not immersive enough. This isn't literature. This isn't literature that absorbs you. At least it doesn't absorb me. In order for me to keep my interest piqued, I would need a real challenge. And this challenge could be puzzles, riddles. And unfortunately, I can't show you this because I can't find it, but I have a very old riddle book. It's from the 50s, and it was gifted to my father by his father for Christmas. And it's a book about this thick, and it contains all kinds of riddles. Some are mathematical, some are linguistic, some have to do with semiotics, and they are quite hard and you have to spend a lot of time on them, but they could definitely be built into a story. But again, you would probably have to take them down a notch because you can spend half a day on one of those riddles. I remember there was one where you're an archaeologist and you find some hieroglyphs, you need to decipher them. And you have some clues and you have to do this, and I did it because I'm a linguist myself, so that was right up my alley. And I ended up with something that looked like text, but it made no sense. I was like, this is what it says, but what, you know, this is a translation of these hieroglyphs, but you know, it doesn't make much sense. The problem was, when I looked it up in the solution, that if I had been born in the 40s, it would have made sense because it was the hieroglyphic version of a German proverb, or it's not even a proverb, it's kind of like a phrase, you know, which I had never heard. When I read it, it made perfect sense. And since it rhymes and has alliterations, it was like, yeah, well, this would be something, you know, I don't know, maybe from a fairy tale or whatnot. But I hadn't heard it. So I was looking at this. My translation was correct. But it didn't make any sense because it was like, you know, so, you know, blah, blah, blah says to male offspring, I will remove myself from the dwelling and you shall stay in the house. So that was kind of the translation. That's what it said. But it was like, okay, well, why is that? I mean, that's a really weird sentence to hide in hieroglyphs, even if this is a riddle book. I mean, you might want to get something more from it. The problem was I had not heard this saying in German ever before. And my mum knew it, but again, she was also born in the 40s. But she also says, you know, I've never said it myself, you know. So anyways, this was... so for those of you who speak German, the answer is Friedrich sprach die Frau Mama, ich geh fort und du bleibst da. But, you know, so, and this brings me to the gamification aspect of riddles. Because today, games are a multinational affair. Lots of games are today created in English and then translated into other languages. I mean, Time Stories is translated from French into all kinds of languages. We have German versions of, I believe, probably every single FFG game. I know that the old Sherlock Holmes consulting detectives from the 80s were also translated into German, and I know that there were translation errors in there which made the game sometimes unplayable because some information was missing, which can always happen. Of course, Call of Cthulhu is available in German. I know the French version. I even have the French version, which is the same book, but it's just visually way more pleasant. I'm not sure if this was ever translated. I guess not. I don't think so anyway. But riddles, especially when it comes to literary references and things like that, can be very tricky and can actually then, although I would love to have them in my games, make the game terrible or maybe even unplayable if you don't understand what's going on. So, Friedrich sprach die Frau Mama, ich geh fort und du bleibst da would be such an example, because I would be like, okay, you know, I've made the translation of the text. It's correct. It's perfect. But it doesn't mean anything. It's just words strung together. Cohesion is there, but it doesn't make any sense. And I would explain to you, or I will give you an example of where I witnessed something like this, where I thought this is just such a brilliant thing to do. It's a nice riddle. It's a really good puzzle. It was part of a Call of Cthulhu game that I saw on Into the Darkness. And the investigators are invited to a house where they're supposed to find someone's, where they are supposed to look through somebody's stuff after they've died, and they can get, they can stay there for up to 2 weeks and they can take whatever they like. And they are given a piece of paper which contains, I want to say, 4 lines. And each line is a sentence, and each line contains something that sounds like a riddle or something that is code for something else. One of the lines is Lusitania, Titanic, Maine, and one more ship name. And looking at this, you kind of go, okay, that's all kinds of things. Ships, it could be wreck. They were like, well, did all of these sink? Because they thought, you know, it's the first letter. So ship didn't work, wreck didn't work. Maybe it's the Atlantic because they all sank in the Atlantic. But then the debate started, did the Maine actually sink, or is it still in service at the time in the 1920s? So, you know, it could have been A, S, W. Then there was another one which indicated that whatever it was describing, I can't even recall it, was something that grows in a garden and in rows. Okay. Then there was one that was like that there is two of them and they can only move one space and the game is over when one of them is cornered. Of course, that's the kings in a chess game. And then there was one that indicated that it's job to keep stuff secret, and I'm usually red, and when I'm broken, then my work is done. And of course, everybody agreed that's seal. So there they were debating, I would say for the better part of an hour, what the result was. What was the solution to this riddle? So they had kings and they were, or king, chess king. This is something that would work anywhere where people play chess. And chess has been around for a very long time. And most cultures know chess. I would probably say even all cultures know chess at this stage. Although it may not be a traditionally, let's say, Japanese game, that's more Go, they would definitely know chess. So chances are that most people who would sit down to play a Call of Cthulhu role-playing game know chess, or if you have a group of 5, there would be one person who knows enough rules of chess to be able to identify these things as kings. The thing that grows in rows could be anything, depending on what kind of a garden you're in, so they didn't find that out. They just didn't. Next one was the 4 ship names. Okay, so that could be ships. Yeah, they all identified them as ships. I was able to identify them as ships. But then again, you know, I live in Ireland. I've been to the Titanic Museum. Everybody knows that the Titanic sank. I saw the film. I thought it was awesome. Although it had Leonardo DiCaprio in it. But Kate Winslet pretty much made up for that. And I think the 3rd ship name was also known to me, and I just guessed that the main was a ship as well. It did make sense. And then you had the seal. Okay, so there you stand. What is it? They kept talking about it. They tried everything. And then, out of nowhere, this English guy comes out with kings and cabbages, ships and seals. Alice Through the Looking Glass. That's a quote from Alice Through the Looking Glass. And here the problems begin. Number 1, even if you have read Alice Through the Looking Glass, and I have read it, I've read it once, I don't remember this. I don't know how many people have actually read the book long and often enough to remember it. Number 2, this may be an English native speaker thing, because most Germans have not read Alice in Wonderland. It's not one of the widely read children's books in Germany. Secondly, if it's a children's book, children would probably read it in German. And there we have the issue with king and cabbage. If it's translated as Kohl, then it would work. Könige und Kohl, I don't know. But ships and seals is going to get difficult, because what is the seal that they're speaking of? Is it the seal with the wax, in which case it has nothing to do with ships? Or is it the seal that is the sea dog, der Seehund, which would be found in the ocean, just like the ships are? Because the two words have nothing to do with each other in German. They're completely different. And if it's actually Seehund, which I believe it is, then this whole shenanigans with I'm red and if I'm broken, my work is done doesn't work, because it's a pun, because seal can be both in English. So the whole riddle wouldn't work in a German environment or with only German players. They would be sitting there going, I don't know. Even if the English was really good and they figured out the seal thing, if they haven't read Alice in Wonderland, it's not going to go on. So if this was the answer to one of these, if there was riddles in fighting fantasy, and if this was one of them, and if the answer was kings and cabbages, seals and ships and seals, and then you have to pick where you go based on, you know, this, you would have to try luck. It would be impossible. And of course, again, if you have a GM, they can help you. They can prevent the players from getting totally frustrated and ending up either throwing the game or maybe even going through all the cards in Estrella Drive to find out where to go next, just to look for a clue, you know. And this is why I think, as much as I would love to have choose your own adventure games that work, by the very nature of the fact that if you put in too many riddles or if you turn it into a mind challenge game, 60% of players would give up because they could either not solve them because they're not smart enough, and that's not a reflection on anyone. I was sitting with this book that my father had been given by his father and I had been given by him, and there were riddles I couldn't solve. You know, it was just, sorry, I just didn't get it. I couldn't do it. And then there were some that I could solve quite easily. But if I hadn't been able to use a solution, and here, you know, you could, of course, just keep looking until you find something. But, you know, it's like one of those old text adventures in the days gone by where you were just stuck. There was no internet. There were no forums that you could consult. If you didn't know what you had to do, you were stuck. I remember sitting there playing the Hobbit adventure game way back when in the 80s when it came out, and I just didn't get any further. I was stuck. I couldn't go on. I didn't find my way around. It was it. It was that. I never finished it. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who would have sat there with some of the old Infocom adventures and just sit there and kind of go, I don't know. I don't know where to go now. I have no idea. I've exhausted all my imagination and all the things that I thought I could do. I have no idea. And of course, that's very frustrating. And do you want to pay money for being frustrated? Well, I don't know. So I just think that by their very nature, because you can't always ask for help, or you don't have anyone to ask for help, and you don't just want people to resort to reading through every single one of these ones just to find the solution and find a way to go on. They have to be thin. And that means they are not immersive enough for me. There are lots of people who love them, and that's great. But they're not for me. And I got Grimrock Isle a long, long time ago when I was into, like playing solo because I didn't have anyone, and I got them all at the same time. That's why I have all of them. But I also remember playing Alone Against the Dark, which is supposed to be a good one, and I really didn't think it was that good. And I was very disappointed, and I was thinking to myself, I just hope that Grimrock Isle is better, because that one was actually expensive. I paid 60 quid. It's not worth 60 quid, by the way. But so the answer in short is, are there good choose your own adventure games? I would say time stories can be good, but it is very expensive for what you get, and I don't know if the investment is worth it. I honestly don't know. But it's got puzzles, and since some of them are visual, they will transcend language. So, and it can keep you entertained. The stories are sometimes really good, sometimes they're very bad. But, it's hit and miss. And I think there we have the problem that the authors really need to keep producing good stories, and that's just really difficult for them, I think. It would be for anyone. So I don't know if this series will last and how long. I don't know. I mean, if you want to make that investment, I did because I really wanted to. But, I'm certainly not going to go back to Lumen Fidei. I think another one which could be considered choose your own adventure is Seventh Continent. I don't have it, and I won't get it, but I've seen people play through it, and I think it kind of combines various things. You have to look at stuff very closely, because I remember watching two people playing it, and every so often the guy would go to his wife, can you take a look at this card, because she seems to have very good eyesight. She would hold it close to her face and kind of go, oh yeah, there is actually something, we need to look. Because you basically build the Seventh Continent, you build your your map as you walk around, and it's exploration, it's card management. You have cards with, I guess, abilities or whatnot, and you can use those to advance the story. And I think that this is probably a little bit like Choose Your Own Adventure, because you also make a decision: do I go left, do I go right, what do I do? And it seems good fun. I don't know how immersive I would find it, and I'm not sure if it plays well. I mean, you could, of course, play it well. You could play it solo. You don't need anyone else. You know, you also have avatars. You also play someone that has certain abilities. But I think a lot of this is the fun part, where you basically discuss with the other person or people around the table what you're going to do. But you can play it solo. It's not a problem at all. These ones are made for solo play. You're not meant to talk to someone. And of course, the Call of Cthulhu ones are specifically made for one solo investigator. So you don't have anyone to help you. You don't have anyone whose skills you could use if your own aren't good enough. The only way you can do this then is to die and then bring in somebody else, but then give them the skills that you know you're going to need, and then just throw them in there and hope that they will be more lucky with their die rolls. Which, yeah, is one way of doing it, but maybe not the most satisfying one. So, and while I'm talking to you, I'm holding these. These are actually cards that I made for Advanced Hero Quest, because that's what I'm going to play at the long bank holiday weekend, and I'm going to make some movies about that, because I'm really intrigued by this, a lot more than I am by the Grimrock Isle game. So, Choose Your Own Adventure. If somebody has a 7th Continent copy that they are happy to part with for a very reasonable price, you can send me a PM and maybe we can work something out. But I'm certainly not going to buy it at its full price, and I certainly don't need a new copy. I just need a copy that is playable and doesn't look like it's falling apart anytime soon. But I suppose that this would be a Choose Your Own Adventure that I could possibly get behind. I know time stories is something that I do enjoy, but again, each story is different, and I really like the Asylum. I think even the Marcy case is okay-ish. Lumen Fidei I really didn't like, because they then in the middle of the game just changed the game, literally, because they didn't have any story. I thought that the one with the dragons was super. I also liked the one with the Egyptians. And even just watching people play it on YouTube, you can see how much enjoyment they're getting out of it. And I think it's actually the mechanics are very simple, which makes it great. But it is a huge investment, because you pay 50 euros or so for the base, and it's almost 21 euros. So, and each one of these is really just, once you've played it, you've played it. Of course, if you then break it down at how much you paid for it and then how much time you spent on it, it's actually good value for money. But then you have one of those boxes, and then, you know, it's just sitting there. So it's also a question of how wasteful do you want to be with our resources, or do you then want to sell it on? Who's going to buy it off you? Because once you've broken open the cards, you know, you would really have to keep them very close together and ensure that nothing is amiss and that they're all ordered in the same way. I wouldn't buy this secondhand anyway. I would really not do that, because you might end up with an important part missing, which could suck. So, yeah, like I said, Choose Your Own Adventure. Maybe not for me. I mean, so Geek Gamers, can I really help you and recommend something? I would recommend Time Stories, cautiously, because of the investment. 7th Continent, maybe I haven't played it, but I think it looks really good. And if somebody has a copy that they would like to get rid of, just let me know. But other than that, it's maybe not my game. I will stick with other games, and I will also, I found a really interesting riddle book which I'm going to get myself for my holidays. So I can do Python in the morning and riddling in the afternoon. So have a good night. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.